Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Alexander, let's jump into the first question.
Thanks, TJ. First one is from TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The second half of last night's U.S. football game where the Steelers lost turned into a literal blizzard. What impact does this have on the streaming hardware? How do we think Amazon handle it? Not as much macro blocking as I expected to see.
Jonas?
With snow and confetti are the two things where, as an encode engineer, you just start screaming at whoever planned that right at the most important point of the show. There's a lot of encoders now that are really good at doing this, and what you'll see less macro blocking now on a lot of the codecs, and it just gets softer. That's what the really good encoders do. Probably the encoder I've seen the most is Intenor. They have an X264 based software encoder. It's really expensive hardware and compute-wise to encode with X264, but man, does it look beautiful. And they have some really nice big esports shows where they drop the confetti, and you still see the confetti, and then you don't as clearly anymore. LiveX did a great comparison of a couple encoders on their channel in their encoder shootout, where they show confetti, and it's surprising how many encoders like straight up break or don't adhere to rules anymore. There were a couple encoders that couldn't deal with the bitrate being so much higher because it's much more complex to encode that, so the bitrate raises, and then that's really interesting for us as engineers to look at what happens if you exceed the bitrate, because constant bitrate isn't as constant as a lot of people think. And if you have a sudden rise, that can be like detrimental to your whole system, because suddenly you have higher transmit requirements, you have higher amount of packages. Your NOC might suddenly scream at you because you use a whole lot more network to the CDN. But with great encoders, you can get over that most of the time relatively good now.
Alex?
My guess is, TJ, you were probably watching at the top tier. You probably, if you were watching in a tier that was lower, outside of the top tier, the whole picture might have fallen apart, because that was an incredibly I was thinking about exactly what you're talking about here. I don't think you needed to mention that the Steelers lost. I think you could have left that out. I mean, personally, but I think
meat wound.
Yeah, I know it's too soon, TJ. So anyway, but I will say that I was thinking about it last night, watching it and going, wow, I'm actually pretty amazed. I saw some macro blocking, but I was expecting it to just turn into blocks. Like it was so, and that was solved in a couple different ways. As Jonas said, great encoders. I believe that the standard, because it's AWS, I'm going to guess that they're using Elemental 800 or 900s. These are jet engines. Like they used to have fronts that look like this one. So they're not orange or whatever, but these are jet engines, and they are about $150,000 each. So that's the processors that they're using to process the video, and so that's probably how they get it into the CDN. But I think that really what you benefited from is being at the top of the tier, where they're probably throwing an enormous amount of data down the pipe. So I don't know what the way to look at this, by the way, is you can dig into if you go into developer tools inside of Chrome and you look for the M3U8, you can look. Oftentimes, you'll see the M3U8, hidden somewhere in there, and you go find it, and then you can get a hold of the list, and you can see what they're actually encoding at, and what the bandwidth is, and how they're doing the audio and everything else. And so, if you look for that, the manifest, you can usually find it on a web page, somewhere, if you're digging into the code. But I'm going to guess that they were, the top tier of that is over 20 megs a second, well over 20, maybe even 30 megs a second, that it's sending down that as the very highest quality. And I think they did a great job. I think that is a nightmare. I mean, that last night was, from an encoding perspective, about as hard as it gets. You have high action. I mean, there was places where, now I admit that I think that it did break up to a point. You probably didn't notice it, but there were parts where they were kicking field goals where you couldn't even see the ball. I think that you might not be able to see that, but in a 4K pristine stream, you'd probably be able to see where the ball went. And in a compressed stream, there was just so much snow that it wasn't able to be resolved. So it did break down a little bit here and there, but it was really a tour de force for that team because it was a hard team. It was a hard show to do. I mean, I can imagine on the back end they were trying to figure out where the ball was some of the time because it was just really a mess. So it was anyway. So there you go. But we don't have to talk about what the result of the game, but I think that we can talk about the tech.
Another thing that I appreciated that their graphics team pulled in is they actually had the yardage markers on the field. Like I remember when the Eagles had the Snow Bowl back in 2013, and the snow completely covered the field, and they actually had people coming out in the middle with leaf blowers so the players could see where the lines were. On last night's broadcast, they had the whole entire field overlaid with the numbers in the right font, and so that you could see what was going on. And it held up decently well when the players were running over it. I thought that was...
Yeah, most of that's calibrated beforehand. If it had snowed before the game, it might not have been possible for them to do that. But all that calibration is done to the cameras before the game, and it's getting to the point where it's because what happens is that the cameras that show that line typically, not always, but typically are they're just pan and tilt, so they don't move at all, and so you can calibrate. You can calibrate to the field where they are, and so you're just setting a point of where the yard marker is, and it used to be that they were tracking it, but now it's literally locked down. So the camera is carefully calibrated, and so from this point, and I'm not sure whether they're nodal or not, but I would do it nodally. You make a nodal point for the thing, but from this point, I know that everything will be pixel for pixel accurate, and as long as there isn't too much wind on that camera and it doesn't move at all, it should be pixel for pixel. And I think that that's the way that those work at this point. And then the keying is the hard part. You got, being able to key over the players, especially when some of the players are wearing white and there's white. It looked like there was a transparency problem in parts of the game because the Steelers had white shirts on top of a white background.
Your questions and your votes do drive the show, and we've got an awesome stacked panel today. I think the count is 13 or 14 at the moment, which is excellent for a Friday. So make sure you get those into Makana, where you can also ask questions, vote on the
Minneapolis, Minnesota, bowl video / cinema tripod heads compared to flat base video cinema heads. What are the advantages, disadvantages of one style compared to the other? Looking for both theoretical and real world examples.
Bill.
Let's start out with figuring out what you're trying to do, and I'm going to break it into 3 general categories: studio kinds of rigs, ENG type rigs out in the field, and mobile, which is the newest thing that everybody's using, smaller things. I would go in a different direction depending on where my practice mostly lives. I will say that probably most shooters are somewhere in that middle category. A few people are really doing official studio stuff, and mobile is coming on hot and heavy, but when you're really kind of growing your practice, that middle zone. And in the middle zone, there are uses for both bowl and flat mounts, in my opinion. The problem is, if you have a bowl, and bowls typically come in 100 millimeter and 75 millimeter, in most of my career, I used 100 millimeter bowl tripods, and the great advantage of them is that if you have a relatively mid-sized load, they're really easy to unscrew that pole in the bottom, adjust your camera on a fine thing, and then lock it down. The problem comes in when you start rigging your camera with heavy batteries and teleprompters and things like that. You can get a rig that is so top-heavy that unscrewing that loosened thing and trying to muscle it into the correct position can be a real hassle. So it really has to do with the kind of practice that you're doing. Flat pieces, flat mounts are more stable. They don't require that. In fact, you can't do that kind of adjustment on them, which means you're going to be doing your adjustment another way, either messing with the tripod legs to try to get your horizon level straight or something else. Little less convenient, certainly, and a lot slower, but more stable once you lock it in place. Just for a moment on the fact that things are getting lighter, cameras are getting lighter, the payloads are getting lighter. So the mobile rigs that we're using now have all come down. I used to own 4 tripods that were all big and beefy. I now have, I think, 7 or 8 tripods, most of them much smaller because the camera payloads are not smaller, and they're easier to adjust and get right. And even things like desktop tripods are now very valuable. So little tiny adjustable pan and tilt heads and things like that are more commonly in use now. So you really have to know what's your practice going to look like and what are you trying to get done. My 2 cents.
Courtney?
Well, that's about 100 cents there. Bill gave us a really good explanation of the reason. And we can look at what we're talking about. This is O'Connor, I think, invented the bowl head. Before that, Mitchell camera had flat base systems. And there's a round bowl here at the bottom of the tripod. You can see it a little better on this adapter that from Newer. And I can't believe this is only $15. That is amazing.
That would have been $175 on the day.
If you buy it from O'Connor, that would,
it'll last at least a couple shoots.
Yeah, exactly. The bottom that you can attach a to anchor your tripod and camera to whatever you've got your tripod sitting on, so you can put a little weight on it to make it a little lower weight. But as Bill said, it's easier to adjust your level. If you're going to be shooting in the studio and you're going to be on a dolly or something, once you level the camera, you don't need to change it much because you hope that the floor is level to what you're shooting, or what you're shooting is level to floor. But if you're outdoors where you may be on uneven ground, or you're in San Francisco where you're shooting on a hill, your horizon is not going to match the ground. So then the only way to adjust the level of the camera to even out your horizon is to adjust the length of each tripod leg one at a time. And to do that while you're looking at a level is kind of hard. And if you look at this unit here, you see that there's a little level right on the head so that you can adjust that bubble level to be exactly level just by moving that, grabbing the handle underneath and swiveling it around. And for heavier cameras, the ball level really doesn't work. That's a 75 millimeter ball, which is for these small cameras, and the 150 is what the O'Connors were, 150 millimeter balls. But there's a limit to how much weight you can stack above that center of gravity and still have it not break loose when you're trying to do a fast pan or fast tilt. You're testing the strength of that ball level on the bottom. So it's much easier to wrangle the level, especially with a heavy camera, than trying to adjust the legs one at a time.
Alex?
I use non-bowl tripods for personal projects and things that are fun. And when I go out on Sunday, I do not use anything except for bowl tripods when I'm working for money. It is moving tripod legs is just a little part of hell. Like, I just think that if a camera operator goes to hell, they're just going to have to make all their adjustments with tripod legs. So, that's going to be part of the punishment. It is just it's just so horrible. And the thing is that you'll buy all these tripods when you get started, and you think that that you got this little Manfrotto, or you got this thing you bought at your local photo shop, or whatever photo company or camera store. As soon as you have a ball head, you're like, oh, I understand now. like why? You just unscrew it and level it out. So I would say that, you really want to use bowls whenever you can. Again, you can get away with it for small projects, but moving legs is no way to live.
And Jason?
Yeah, everything that everybody said. And it's worth mentioning anytime we bring up tripods, especially for fluid heads, which are the ball heads. Balance your load on your tripod. You will destroy your really expensive fluid head if you're super. It's usually front heavy, but any sort of heavy will do you.
Next question.
Zach Salsmith in Chicago, New York. I'm utilizing Companion Cloud and satellite for a gig this weekend, as I need to both local and remote control. So far, so good. Has anyone run into issues with a similar setup or have any success stories?
Jonas?
2 things to keep in mind if you're doing companion satellite. Make sure that you also look at if you're using a VPN or what you're using to connect to satellite. Satellite takes over all attached Stream Deck devices. Another thing to keep in mind, because you won't be able to use Companion locally with Companion Cloud and Companion satellite, and then I personally wouldn't use Companion Cloud just yet, so have a backup in plan, because if you read their documentation, I'll read that from them real quick. Do not use this product in production. The servers might go on without notice. Your license might get revoked without notice. The entire product might get changed or rethought without notice. This is for testing and feedback purposes only. So you might be good and you might survive your show, but keep this notice in your head and plan for backup. I think with Companion Satellite and with a VPN, something like Tailscale that doesn't require to set up an additional server, you can get most of this done without Companion Cloud. You can just use HTTP triggers. Feedback might be a little harder to get, but it's possible. So keep those couple of things in mind.
Guy?
Yeah, just have a second way out if you plan on using it. Test, and then have a comms and a second operator or another splash top screen or something where you can take over and take control, because there's nothing worse than having a cut coming up and you're looking at the multi-view and you look at your Stream Deck and everything's gone and you're just like, ugh. And it's so nice to be able to just push a button, say, hey, I've lost control, take over, and have what we call a co-pilot or somebody that can actually take over and help you out.
Next question.
From the QR code, Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was wondering how many Office Hours Global members are there currently? Just curious.
Mr. Lindsay.
That's a great Sunday question. So ask that on Sunday. You will have to be in Makana to ask that. So I know, Chester, you usually use the QR code, but you'd have to, that's kind of more of an internal one. So ask that on Sunday and we'll talk about it.
Next question.
David Arsenault in Gaspésie, Quebec, Canada. I'm looking to purchase my first audio mixer for live video production with my ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. I was considering the RodeCaster Pro II, but after watching our episode on Dante, I'm wondering if I should instead consider the Yamaha DM3-D.
Nigel?
Yeah, so I originally got my X32 because I wanted to learn both the use of a digital mixer, because I'd really grown up in the analog world, and Dante. And so it was two different sets of decisions. So I managed to get hold of a good X32 fairly cheaply. I put a Dante card in it, which wasn't cheap at the time, and they're still not terribly cheap. And then I discovered that there were multiple different devices I then needed to buy. Well, none of them are expensive. It all adds up and can add up both software and hardware if you go the Dante world. The reality is I'm glad I made the change. First of all, I got to learn to use a digital mixer, but now everything I do is with Dante. It's taken a whole bunch of audio cables out of my studio and simplified a lot of things. But really, you've got to decide if you want to learn to use both and if the end productions you're doing justifies the additional cost.
Alexander?
Yeah, Nigel's advice is good. I'll talk about Dante in a sec, but the RodeCaster Pro II, it's a good quality little mixer, digital mixer with processing and good preamps, but it has really limited I/O. So you really got to think, like, it's fine for podcasts. You're going to get a few people in a room and do podcasts if that's the only thing you're ever going to do. If you want to do production work, a Yamaha DM3-D would be a much more future-proof, more professional console, also built better, solid metal piece as opposed to a little plastic box. And of course, the advantages of Dante, where you have audio, multi-channel audio over IP, so it gives you flexibility with routing and be able to send that audio to multiple destinations on a network. And of course, the outputs, like for me, I started with a really small console, but I've just found I kept on running out of inputs. Like not only did I want to build a studio that could handle multiple microphones for more guests if I needed them, but also the additional outputs to send audio, analog outputs, to not just have studio monitors, but to have that audio go out to, say, multiple headphone amplifiers, or have, mix minus feeds go to separate computers. Some of that can be mitigated with Dante, of course. But having that additional I/O is great. So think hard about what you actually need, not just for the next 6 months, not just for the next 12 months, but for the next few years.
Jonas?
I would first look at what are you trying to do? What are your ins and outs? Do you have a bunch of microphones? Like, are you doing a church live stream, for example? Then you might need a bunch of mics. You might need some choir mics. If you invest into Dante, then you're going to need to have a physical clock that might as well be your DM3. But then you also need to look into your networking, look into a stage box. Otherwise, it's not really a good purchase. I would say the RodeCaster would not be my first choice just because it has a lot of podcasting type features. If you're not doing a podcast, I don't think it's a great choice. I would go with a more traditional mixer. One thing to also keep in mind is as you grow, or maybe if you're in a volunteer situation, you might have other people helping you. I see people trying to like get finicky and like do something clever, but most of the time then you're the only person that can ever do it. If you're sick, if you're ill, if you, I don't know, win the lottery and don't want to do this thing, it's really hard to train other people on it. So also keep that in mind. I think the DM3 is a fine mixer. I would look at something that you that interfaces well with what you have, and then also keep in mind if you use the ATEM to output and stream, how do you get into the ATEM cleanly? Do you have a DI box? What converters do you need? Make sure that those unsymmetric lines are as short as possible so you don't pick up interference, and possibly also plan with something that can do a backup record. So you don't, if the ATEM screws up your audio in the record, you still have something else.
And Courtney?
Yeah, as everyone else has said, it really depends on what you're going to do as live video work. If you're just doing a podcast where you may be yourself and 2 or 3 other people, and you're going to be the one, you're going to be on camera and trying to run the audio as well, or even if you have a separate audio person, I'd say the RodeCaster is a better value for that, because the RodeCaster, although the Yamaha is certainly a good mixer and digital mixer, and Dante is a good way to route stuff around. The price of the DM3 right now is about $2,000, and I don't know I think that does include the Dante. And the price of the RodeCaster is $600, so you get 3 of these. The thing the RodeCaster does that the DM3 doesn't without external gear is it incorporates playback, it incorporates record, it incorporates Bluetooth on a channel. You can bring in phone callers over Bluetooth. So if you're doing a podcast with callers coming in or you have to play an intro and an outro music, it's all contained within the mixer itself. The mixer stores all those playback cues, things inside the mixer itself, so you don't have to have a lot of outboard equipment. So if you go with a DM3 and you're just doing a podcast, you're going to have a lot of outboard gear to handle phone calls and additional stuff. If you're doing, like was said, a church broadcast where you may need to mic a band or something, then the Yamaha is your better choice because you have a lot more versatility and a lot more inputs and outputs to deal with.
Chris?
Good rule of thumb is to buy 25% more inputs than you think you need, and I would buy twice as many outputs as you think you need. That's how I buy mixers.
And Alexander?
Yeah, and last thing too, as an alternative to the RodeCaster, if you think you'll never need more than the inputs and outputs, that arrives. If you want to play with multi-channel audio, the Mackie DLZ Creator now supports NDI audio on the new firmware. It is bidirectional, and I'm going to be testing this, but this looks like a really good alternative in the same price point or similar price point to the RodeCaster.
Next question.
This one's for me. I noticed that YouTube doesn't seem to like gradients, and I can see banding on our countdown clock, even at 4K. How can this be mitigated?
Jonas?
Sadly, just math. Like, if we look, to be clear what countdown we're talking about the office hours countdown, where we go from black on the left on the outer borders to about 60, 60, 60 in RGB values. If we just look at the picture, we don't have enough color fidelity in the amount in the 8-bit signal to not have stair steppings. So if you think about it, we have, let's say from the left to the middle, we have about 960 pixels, and we have about 60 steps of color that you can change there. So every 100 something pixels, you need to do a step. And depending on how well do you do that, how well you feather that, you will have issues like that. Sadly, it's just math. It's just how the format works. That's why 10-bit is a lot nicer, because then you have a whole bigger range to get those pictures nicer. It would be way worse if we are actually going from, and that's why often you see it in like smaller steps. Like if you do from like a dark blue to a blue, you even have less color steps you can divide there. So like in this case, we have 60 steps we can do, but if we were to make the middle darker, we would have even less steps. So those are things to keep in mind for designing things, because you just don't have the fidelity to do it that you might expect. And 4K actually makes it worse, because now you have twice as many pixels that you need to cover from the left to the middle. So that's why a lot of the broadcasters also do 10 HDR first, 10-bit, and then 4K. Because like if you do 4K and you have 8 bits, you have even larger stretches with gradients like that.
Jeffrey?
And when you're doing live versus doing a pre-recorded upload thing, a lot of things happen that are different. Like for instance, this corner of my area doesn't get used that much, so it's just like with VBR CBR, where it will kind of just sit there and then until movement happens, and then it'll go, okay, this is not a picture anymore, this is video. There are some YouTubers that have some tricks that they do to kind of avoid it, but it's more like they're masking it than anything. The biggest thing is film grain. You put a film grain in there, the idea is it keeps moving in there, and therefore it doesn't sit statically, so you don't see the banding from there. But the banding is still there. It's just tricking the eye to do that. Another thing is if you're fading from one scene to the other, instead doing a jump cut, and it's less recognizable, but it's still there.
Alex?
I will disagree a little bit with the film grain, because it's the film grain for live at least is a disaster. Like in fact, YouTube removes the film grain, not YouTube. Another thing will remove the film grain, deliver it to you, and then put the film grain back in the app. So because it is so damaging, the film grain, like people, like when you do live, the one thing you don't want to add is any grain. In fact, we work very, very hard to not have our cameras using any ISOs that would start to add grain to or any kind of errata to the image, because that's a whole bunch of what you don't want is a bunch of pixels moving if something isn't important. So you want to be very careful about that specifically. We really shouldn't be using that gradient. like we've used it for a long time. It's been one of those things, like it was supposed to be a placeholder for a week, and then we were gonna the idea was, and it's been there for years now, just because we haven't gotten around to it. We had talked about doing a clock and having a clock team actually do that process and build new clocks all the time, and it just hasn't happened. So if you're interested in working on the clock team, let us know. We'll talk about it.
Go ahead, Jason. I'm sorry. What I meant to say was, if you're interested in working on the clock team, in addition to that, there's also other opportunities. And we're going to be talking all about volunteering this Saturday. That's tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. So hang out for our Saturday meeting. Look in Discord for the link. Next question.
Next question is from the QR code Joss Lynch in Burbank, California. When playing with ZoomISO's new feature, Active Speaker, I noticed that when one of my pinned participants speaks, this active speaker feed goes black until the unpinned speaker is talking again. Any way to make it hold the video would be more useful.
Good guy.
Yeah, I'd love to see exactly what your setup is, because I just replicated it here. I'm running ZoomISO here, and you can see that I have active speaker as output number 8 on the Deck Link Quad, and she's talking. She's number 6. She's also in program because she's active speaker. I tend to not use it, but I'm noticing some black flashes in between before it picks up the next person that's talking, but it should just work. It shouldn't have that issue. But there's a danger to using active speaker, especially with boxes, because you can double up the same person if they're in one box, and then all of a sudden you have them jump into another box, and now your 4 box has 2 of the same heads. So I tend to lean away from active speaker and actually do the work myself and cut people in and out.
Alex?
I think in the video side, there is, to what Guy was just talking about, I believe there is unique speaker as well that's in video as well as audio, which is anybody who you're pulling an ISO from, do not include in there. And that may be causing some of the stuff that's there. But I will say, I also am curious why you're pinning and unpinning if you're using ZoomISO. Like I think that it sounds like you're doing some kind of hybrid event where people are actually participating in the meeting, and then you're also pulling ZoomISO. And so that you may be in a outer area of use cases, where a lot of people, when we use ZoomISO, we're not doing any of that work because Zoom is a video delivery mechanism for us. So if you're doing both, it may be causing some errata just because you're doing something that most of us that use ISO don't do. And so like pinning is not something that I would do in a show that I had ZoomISO because I'm building a whole nother show with it. And all I needed to do is have the grid up. So that you may but I would definitely file a report about it.
Thanks for the question, Josh. And he got that to us via the QR code. And you can ask questions 24/7 at askofficehours.global or here at the QR code. It's fast and easy. No sign up or login. Just askofficehours.global. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've seen pictures of studios with dock control surfaces physically integrated into their analog consoles. Is this a common configuration?
Alexander?
It's quite. I do see that very often. The console that's in that photo. Let me just see if I can pull it up here. That is a Harrison 32, what they call the Harrison 32 Classic. So it. I know it looks like a kind of like it's sitting on a piece of furniture, but that is the entire console, including the rest there at the front. That section there where you can put stuff on. So that's what that looks like. But you're right. There's lots of furniture companies that make desks. Zayor comes to mind. That's one company, and also Argosy. To me, those two are some of the top pre-made studio furniture making companies. Now they're very expensive, and they make ones that are bespoke for certain types of hardware. You can get them integrated that have that kind of inset for certain consoles. Of course, you can also get them custom built, and I think some of them or one of them does custom work if you ask for it. But again, it's going to be very expensive.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think what they're just using this is really to control Pro Tools too. You can see the console here. So you have your analog console so that all your input-output gives you that rich, sweet analog sound. And yet you're probably recording in Pro Tools. So this console, digital console here, controls your Pro Tools for recording playback. And if there are flying faders in this, I don't know if they are back then in 72 when that console came out, and some type of MIDI control, they might be able to use the automation of that analog console, interface it somehow to their digital console so that they could control levels from that digital console. But I think that digital console in there is just for controlling record playback of Pro Tools and routing and headphone routing, things like that you need in a studio.
Alexander?
Yeah, Courtney is right. And it looks like, based on that photo too, that little controller, looks like a SSL UF8, which is a really, really awesome controller.
And Alex?
And a lot of folks that I work with that work in Pro Tools are using some kind of analog console for almost all of their controls when they're doing film mixing or something. And there might be 128 channels. And if you talk to them, there's just no way that they can get to what they're doing at the same speed without being able to. Now, a lot of these are Avid dedicated, controllers that are actually built to work with Pro Tools, and they're all flying faders. And they have some of the consoles will then have surround joysticks and screens and so on and so forth that you can work with. But they may have 3 or 4 people working on the same console that is basically controlling Pro Tools, and they're moving all of those things as they work. And many of them have tried to do it with. They've tried to do it with their mouse. They can kind of do it, but they're like, you can't. It's just the speed of which you need to work. You need those analog controls, and so they're very important.
Next question.
John Folson, Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. I have a Mac Studio with 2 displays, an HDMI out to TVs for students, and a studio monitor for me. On startup, the HDMI is always the primary. Hard to log in. How do I force startup to see the studio monitor as primary?
Jason?
Okay, this isn't a great idea, but I'll tell you anyway. So first thing you do, go to System Preferences in anything that's later than Ventura. Click on Displays under the Arrangement tab. Grab that little bar, the menu bar, and make the studio monitor the primary display. Then shut down your Mac Studio completely. Disconnect the HDMI cable from from the TV or the computer, start it up with just the studio monitor connected. Once that boots, it'll recognize the studio monitor as the primary display. Then you reconnect the HDMI display. If macOS is not being weird, that should remain the primary. If it doesn't, then you open Terminal and you enter this into, let's see, is that big enough to see? You enter this into Terminal. And what this will do is get rid of your preference and allow you to try again. Those are that's the only way I know how to do this reliably.
Go ahead, Bill.
Jason nailed it. This is one of those times when the Mac is trying to help you. It's always looking at where you are and saying, if things go south, if for some reason something crashes, how do I get you right back to where you were before? But those kind of on startup, get to a state I don't want, I've run into a lot. And it's just a process of training the computer if you can. And Jason, thank you for allowing people to understand that the terminal can override everything. It is very delicate, though. So if you don't know anything about programming or things like that, opening up the terminal can be kind of a dangerous thing because you can certainly mess things up really badly. But yeah, if you are closing out, don't just reset your computer. Shut it down if it's the way you want it, because it will come back up that way. And if you want it to come up a different way, you have to do the kind of things Jason was talking about.
Two other considerations for you, John. Number one, if the user that you're logged into on that computer is not the administrator, then it's possible that setting the primary display in system preferences will set it for your user and not for the whole computer. So on startup, it's going to go back to whatever was defaulting. And sometimes in an education environment, you may need an admin's help for something like that. The other thing is, if for whatever reason you have File Vault turned on, I have run into this before where if you have File Vault turned on, it doesn't, for whatever reason, get your primary display setting until you've logged in and decrypted the disk. And I have 8 monitors sitting in front of me right now across 2 computers, and there is no rhyme or reason that I can figure out as to which screen my password comes up on, because it's like the screen that it shows up on I would never use as my primary monitor in any situation, and yet I'm like looking in the tiny screen of a multi-viewer to try and type my password. If you find a reliable way to do this, report back, because inquiring minds want to know. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama City. How does VAR work? Is this just a slower version of replay? I've been asked to set up VAR for a sport event, martial arts. I'm thinking vMix replay with NDI inputs. How would you do it?
Chris?
So VAR is video assisted referee, and that specific term is really soccer or football internationally. Most other sports just call it instant replay or referee review. It doesn't, but VAR specifically is a soccer term, and really all it is just instant replay. It's no different. It's just taking what those instant replays are and sending them to a referee so that they can review them. I'm not sure the exact protocols in terms of how that works in soccer, and depending on the sport, depends on what angles of the camera that the referee gets. I know sometimes in hockey, there will be angles that are built into the rink that are specifically only for the referees to review, like an offsides call, and they're they do nothing else but shine straight down the line so that you can see exactly those offsides call. Those are typically not made available to the broadcast until a later point. But in general, it's just instant replay is all it is. And depending on the production, you can have some cameras that have higher frame rates. I know I think the Super Bowl, they always have a couple cameras that are 120 FPS, and just some really fast cameras to get some really silky smooth slow motion replays. But that's nothing specific to the VAR.
Jonas?
Really depends on the federation of the sport you're working with. A lot of the tech might be the same, but often there are special requirements. There's I know in football there's a special software that allows you to draw lines to see where the people are. There might be special requirements with how far and back and forward the referee is allowed to go. There might be a reason that one person is only allowed to control it, and like can show the referee only 3 pictures or something like that. I would check in with the federation and check what the requirements are, the legal requirements are from their side. I totally think you can make it work with vMix, replay, and a couple companion buttons, something like that. But keep in mind that the most in this one isn't like all the tech. Check with the federation on the rules, because there might be very specific rules, and you don't want to be the one who in the end gets challenged on a call.
Just a reminder, we've got some evening shows that are available now on office hours. You can watch them live or later. Extra Hours is on Mondays, 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern. And then we've got the Rundown on Thursday nights, 6 Pacific. Next question.
Pedro G. Gonzalez III in Oklahoma City is asking, is this the ultimate budget LED background display?
Chris?
I can't speak to how well it will work as a background display, but I can tell you I have 4 versions of these TVs. I've got 2 58-inch versions. I have a 43-inch version and a 50-inch version of these Hisense TVs, and they have been perfectly serviceable for me. Are they the best quality? No, they're not, but they are super cheap, and they've been pretty reliable.
Alex?
As ultimate budget, they look like they check all the marks. The thing you have to be careful of is just how much control you have over color, which you will need for a background. And so you either need the color on what's delivering to the monitor, or you need color or need control in the monitor. And these Hisense oftentimes don't have a ton of control. That's what we had, the experience that we had. We don't have a ton of control over the color. So it doesn't mean that you can't use them. It just means that you have to know how you're going to color correct the image coming out of your computer into that, and that can be done with lookup, a variety of lookup tables or so on and so forth to make that happen. So that's the only thing you have to think about. But an 85-inch 4K, it's probably not going to moray. You're just going to pull it back far enough to make sure that it's a little out of focus, and you should be fine.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, sometimes consumer monitors are not professional monitors, and so you run into some weird problems. The one thing that I will note is that there is a 60 hertz refresh rate, but it will automatically drop down to 59.9 sometimes if it doesn't feel that it's getting the right type of signal. And at that point, you might start seeing some sort of oddities coming out of the monitor if it's behind you. If that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a monitor to be behind you during video, if you're looking for it for professional editing or anything like that, then you might want to look at something a little bit more geared towards that.
And Courtney?
Yeah, if you're just using it for a background monitor in a kind of a virtual studio, it'd be great for that. It's cheap, Black Friday sale, $548 on November 25th for a 85-inch class monitor. That's pretty cheap. And Hisense is, it's a very common made monitors made in China. So by now, before the tariffs go into effect, they also have manufacturing plants in Slovenia and Mexico, I believe. So they may shift some of their production to those plants if they get hit with tariffs from China. But they are one of the largest manufacturers of TVs by market share in China. So there are so many of them out there, and they manufacture them under other titles and you'll find other chains using the Hisense monitor and private labeling them. So they're pretty common, and I think it should work fine for a background monitor. 120 frame refresh rate too is good.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama City, what are your thoughts on YouTube 1080p Premium? What does this really mean? Did they decrease the quality on free options versus premium?
Alex?
The biggest quality difference is ads. I don't think that YouTube is watchable, literally not watchable without premium. There's so many ads. If you've ever had premium, you may be used to the abuse, so it may be fine. But if you have ever had premium and you watch it for a couple weeks, you cannot go back. It is a horrible, horrible experience to watch YouTube with ads. Unusable in my opinion.
Jeffrey?
I think what Eduardo is talking about is the enhanced bit rate in 1080p, which comes in a premium, part of the premium package. So that means that it will try to send the video at the best bit rate to you, so you don't get things like noticeable banding and stuff like that we talked about earlier. The biggest problem with that is if you're watching a video and they're not utilizing the bandwidth by sending the best video. Like, for instance, I just sent 4K video and I was setting it at 66 megabits per second, but the problem was it was a long video and there are some limitations for uploading video, and so I had to dumb it down just to get the length up to YouTube. And if somebody's watching it, they don't get that full view because of the fact that it can't send higher than, I think at that point it was 40 megabits per second. So those are the reasons why you probably want that. But yeah, everything can change at any time, and you could add and subtract stuff all the time on YouTube.
Harshid?
Yes, as Jeffrey said, I look at it as that subtraction and adding bits and pieces. So to me, really, it's building capacity. And for the quality of video that's being able to be put out by creators or the back end, so to speak, the receiving end, I mean, yes, you have the choice to pick the highest quality, but people don't always end up doing that, and you always get these 720p videos. But instead, I think this might just build that little capacity, because if we look at their football and offerings in that section on YouTube TV, if they're trying to copy that same type of business model, then they're at least letting people know, okay, you're going to get better quality out of maybe the video, and that pushes the cost value of them charging you more money, because always they have this shift in price points. The family pricing right now is like $26, and you get 5 accounts or 6 accounts you could share it with. But when you're a, let's say, creator or someone that's going to be willing to pay the money, and then of course the ads, getting rid of the ads just by paying premium, that builds that a better capacity, so there's a little bit more to charge. So kind of like saying, we take away the headphone jack, but we'll charge you for a dongle. So that's just building that extra piece of capacity so they could charge you a little bit on their price point.
Next question.
Jack Cannon, Phoenix, Arizona. Can Jonas share more about his Space Commz Zoom integration that will be coming out soon? We have a remote live stream that we are wanting to start using comms on. Curious how it will integrate with Zoom.
Jonas?
Basically, the idea that this is all based on is that the common issue is that you can pull out isolations from people in Zoom. But if you only want to talk back to your host, in the past it has been a little difficult. So what we built is, gonna show you this. What we built is a little tool as an output and a Zoom app that allows you to have this little app on the right side. It supports guest mode, so your panelists or your remote speakers don't need to download anything. You just go in here, you say, hey, I want to assign a participant. You assign what talent they are in the admin version of the app. And then, like I said, this is what the user sees. They don't need to change anything. It's just within Zoom, comes out their speaker, comes out their default speaker, not the speaker selected in Zoom. So you can do some cool things there, but that's also causing some issues. And then for you on the other side, it just shows up as a normal party line within Space Commz. So you can have as many of those as you like. You can have 30, 50 talent links. If you're forced to use something else like Teams, you can also, we have a URL version of this that you can just send them. They open it up in the web browser, and that's it. Nothing to install, and you just have an IFB into their ear directly, and it's specific per person.
Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Recommend an external monitor that will also record from my HDMI port on my Canon R5. Budget is $800-ish. Are there any that will record internally, or do I have to buy a separate drive/card to record onto?
Guy?
Yeah, take a look at the Black Friday sale that's coming up on the Shogun Ultra by Adamus. This is a 2000 nit monitor that'll record up to 8K RAW, and it'll also do NDI in and out, so you can use it as an NDI monitor. It looks like this. It's got little caddies that you can put SSD drives into. So right now you see this price as $11.99, but your little birdie told me, I got some inside information, it's going to drop down to under $800 for 3 days. So it's coming up here. Stay tuned to your normal resellers. But I don't think there's anything else on the market that's this bright, that goes this high of resolution and has NDI. It's a pretty fantastic device. So that's definitely the winner out of the bunch.
Jonas?
I think it's my number one Blackmagic product is the Blackmagic Video Assist. I always like to also record with it in the camera, but then it's great, especially the 12G version that is the larger model. You can even get XLRs in. That saved me on a project lately where I just was able to get the XLRs in. Is it the best quality? Probably not, but with select cameras, you can also record Blackmagic RAW with it, and you can record on the SD card, you can record on an SSD that you can attach over USB-C. It's probably the most handy problem solver for the price you can find. You can play back, you can use it as a webcam, scopes, all of the good things, and should be right in your budget.
If you're enjoying office hours, there are a few ways you can help. You can like and subscribe to the channel or donate. We are a nonprofit, so you can go to officehours.global/donate for that. There's also volunteer opportunities. Officehours.global/volunteer to sign up for that. We've got our volunteer meeting tomorrow. Also, there's still time. It's been extended until Saturday. There's time to get the limited edition Office Hours Global t-shirt. It's tight fit and good looking. Man, just can't wait to get my hands on this. It's going to be great. So you get a little something, and you get to support the show. Check that out at officehours.global/shop. Next question.
Jeff Veely and Henderson. Yesterday we discussed replacing the ISP gateway. Mickey recommended Netgate 4200. Is there an option that's more budget-friendly for live streaming, $100 to $300?
Jonas?
It's the one thing that you really need to care about. I would stretch your budget a tiny bit and get a Peplink B1. You can get it on Amazon around $300. You get 2 Ethernet ports, and in case of emergency, you can plug your phone in and tether with it that way. It is a really great router from Peplink. It's amazingly cheap. I use it here for everything that I do because I have 2 ISPs, and it works well. It can even do cool things that often you have to do with these weird modems and fiber modems. Is like, I need to be on a specific VLAN and then get a specific IP address, and all that info can be typed into there, and it just works flawlessly, fails over, and you get a free Fusion Hub subscription as well for a single person, so you can put that on a cheap cloud hoster. Now you have your own VPN tunnel. You can just extend it from there. It's probably the best investment for $300 on routers you can make.
Jason?
I've done a ton of these. And Jeff, you didn't mention what your way in is. I'm going to assume coaxial cable internet. And I've done a lot of these, and I've yet to have any problems with the Ubiquity cable modem. It's called the Ubiquity UCI. It's $279. It is Comcast Business supports, so you don't need the contracted piece of junk or Spectrum. And straight up Xfinity Residential are all supported. Yeah, I like it.
Next question.
Unsock Dorji is asking, which model of the GL.iNet router should I buy? I currently use a TP-Link.
Jonas?
It depends what you want to do. If you just need something cheap to throw down, get the GL.iNet Mango. It's tiny, cheap, and they're very hackable.
Next question.
Funsock Dorji is asking, hi panelists, need your suggestion to remove ground loop from bad electrical connection. I'm returning from a live stream where the audio system had terrible ground loop. It was a pro bono work. Thanks.
Courtney?
Well, what I do is I always route all my power to everything that's connected together via cables, audio cables, video cables, to a common ground, to the same AC outlet. Just make sure that AC outlet that you're pulling everything from has enough current capability to handle everything that you're plugging into it. Don't plug lights into the same feed.
I think the problem that he has is that it's already recorded. he's trying to record it, reduce it in post. This is the problem he has, is that he's
well, it
gotten
says
back.
remove ground loop from bad electrical connection. and it was a live stream.
It had a terrible
I think it was
ground look.
recorded. So anyway, if it is a live stream, use a common. If you cannot use the same common ground, use a ground lifter, something like this in America. I'm not sure what you'd use in India. If you're in India, you have these kind of connectors. This is the ungrounded type. And you can probably get an adapter that adapts from grounded to unground. So unground one side if you're on the other side of a building and you can't run AC to the other side of the building. Do that. If you're trying to remove 60 hertz, that's a fairly simple notch filter in post-production.
Alexander?
If you did record locally and you want to just re-upload it later, RX Suite from Isotope. There's also a suite of different applications from Waves.com plugins that'll do that. And Courtney's advice is right. If you're trying to avoid this for next time, having everything on a shared common ground is good. And of course, get rid of any unbalanced audio sources. If you have to have unbalanced stuff, get yourself a high quality DI box that will transform or isolate and convert that to proper balanced XLR. Radial makes a variety of good DI boxes that'll do that kind of thing.
And Alex?
Mickey said for a consistent hum, just a notch filters and EQ. I will admit that I use the RX solution. It just you apply it and it disappears.
Next question.
Steve Urov in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, panel. I have a USB peripheral that prevents macOS from sleeping. Have you ever seen a USB hub with software controllable ports where I could schedule disabling the port to allow device to sleep?
Jason?
Yeah, there are several. Pluggable makes a few, and I believe Pluggable makes one. There's a way to use something like UHub CTL, which you can install from Homebrew to do this. There are also other ways that I'm not going to get into to create a cron job, but if you look this up in macOS or using something called Launch D, that are native macOS ways to do this, but to be very careful with this. I'd use a hub that's industrial that actually has a powered way to do it. Oh, StarText, the name that was coming.
Jeffrey?
So I think what he's asking is if you have like an app that can turn on and off ports so it could keep the Mac awake. Even if there was something like that, it wouldn't be able to do that. The best thing that you have is they have those mice or whatever that just move on their own after a certain amount of time, and that's what keeps the Mac awake. But the best thing to do is to go in the software and tell the monitor not to go to sleep or the device not to go to sleep.
Next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. What are some good security practices with forwarding opening ports to allow for remote connections such as with NDI Bridge?
Go ahead, Jonas.
I mean, if you can, don't. Every port you open is gonna get discovered. There's this little website called Shodan. I keep showing this to people, and they're like, "What do you mean you can find all the publicly accessible BitFocus companion instances that anyone ever forwarded? Type in NDI in here, and you'll find all the bird dogs and all the other NDI cameras that are publicly accessible on there. You see right now I have 118 devices there. If you have to do it, try to get it behind a firewall that allows you to lock down to the IP addresses. Most of the time, I know it's a lot easier to just be like, I'll move IP address. They won't who's really interested? The problem isn't people actually targeting you. It's people just playing around and finding IP addresses. The IP address space for IPv4 is fairly limited. So if you have a public IP address there, it's going to be in Shodan. It's going to be queried a couple days a day. And I always like to say, if you think you're secure and not being attacked, you're probably not looking right. Because as someone who has a couple server hosts and a couple open ports, I can tell you they are attacked 24/7. It never stops. It never will. Just make sure you can detect it fast enough and restrict it down to a specific IP address. It is a lot more complicated. You sometimes will run into issues, but do it for public internet addresses, and especially with something like NDI Bridge, you don't make sure that you know what you're exposing, what port you're exposing, and close it. And don't just disable firewalls because it's not working and you're in a rush. take an extra hour to make it work with a firewall. Because yes, no one is interested in hacking your live stream and taking it over and controlling your ATEM. But someone might be interested in doing some research and just send random UDP packets to you. And if your ATEM is exposed there and the iBridge is exposed there, it might just crash because there's a bunch of weird data being sent there. So keep in mind, it's also people just trying stuff. It's the internet.
And let's wrap up with one more question.
Last question's from Talalik Lopez Waterman in Seattle, Washington. How do the automatic switchover breakers work for generator backups? Is that a breaker relay? How long does the switchover take?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, it usually is a breaker relay. There are some that you can find. I can't believe that they're this price, $58. This is probably not for your whole house switchover, but this is you can feed to one, and you can see the changeover times here. 30 seconds minimum and 1 to 600 seconds reclosing delay time. And so it's not going to be instantaneous, so things are going to go down. So computer systems, you want to have those on a UPS so that they're not interrupted, that are AC powered, because it could take, half a minute to more than a minute to switch over, especially if your generator has to start up and detect voltage loss.
Coming up on office hours, we've got our live-only shows. I like to think of them as members only, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday Q&A, and then Sunday's introspection. So we talk about office hours. If you got questions about office hours, join us for there. You got to be in Makana for those, though. A big thank you to our panel for being here today. I like to say none of us as smart as all of us, and man, is it nice. We've got so much life experience in one place. Just an awesome, awesome panel today. Thank you. And thank you to the back-end crew. Every day, all over the world, everybody's getting together, making our show run. It's truly an amazing thing. Thank you for keeping us organized, helping us move forward. And finally, thanks to the producers for asking a ton of great questions today. It certainly wasn't a short show, and you keep us going with those questions. We had to send some back. So if it's a Makana question, it'll be in your notes. You can ask again later, and we'll get the QR codes in over the next couple shows. Talalik Traversal today, if we had to walk around and ask all these questions, 42,000 miles, 68,000 kilometers. That's 333 million. Bananas for scale. All right, we'll see you in after hours.
Good hustle.
Yeah. Good show.
Thanks for the help with the hands, Alex.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying.
There's a lot of moving parts. When you have a big panel, there's a lot of moving parts. And I was just like, I'm just going to just start moving these things around.
I kept moving. I kept hitting things. Like, oh, nope. Oh, it was like a race.
Yeah.
It's all good.
It's good.
Thanks, everyone. That went fast. Wow.
Yeah. That was a fast hour.
Well done, CJ.
Thanks, everybody.
Giant Friday.
Yeah, great job, CJ.
Thank you.
Good to see you again, Hershey.
Thank you.
Cheers, Harshid. See you later.
Cheers. Take care.